You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dummler, Broncos Country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos Country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host today, Nick Kendell, along with friend of the podcast and fellow Denver Bronco analyst and Iowa Hawkeye fanatic, got to throw that out there, Sayre Bedinger. Sayre, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing great, man. I don't know, the spirit of Carl, I can just feel him with us today, but we have our two Hawkeyes guys here, Broncos and Hawkeyes connection. I feel it just feels right, you know, but it's been a good day, been a good start to the week, and I'm excited to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Carl can't be replaced. That's an obvious thing, you know, that jovial spirit that he brings. But I figured, yeah, if we can get the next best thing, probably on here with Sayre. So you're not perfect. You know, the Broncos
right.
and the Hawkeye stuff is great, but the Cubs Cardinals stuff, no, I'm just giving you a hard time.
It's a tough compromise. I know it's a tough one to compromise on. I happen to be wearing my Cubs gear. They're on a little winning streak right now, so you know how fickle I can be with my sports, Nick. I only rock the gear when they're winning. So no, I'm just kidding.
No, absolutely. It's that time of year where I'm just really starting to itch for football. I work right at the hospital right there, and I see the football stadium every day, and I'm just consuming everything I can, Broncos, Hawkeyes. And I do enjoy baseball, but man, it's June, July, August. I'm just craving that fall crispness of that era, and that just how the city comes alive when it's football season here in Iowa City.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. It just feels like it's time, and thankfully, you know, with the Broncos being in the Hall of Fame game, we get a little bit sooner than we normally do. So, kind of counting down the days, but it's already less than a month, so we're right around the corner, man. It's exciting.
Yeah, nope, absolutely. And luckily for me, I can be a little bit preoccupied with work, obviously the Mile High Huddle gig, and planning everything for the wedding. So just got back from that vacation out in Estes Park, did some hiking, did a lot of meetings, and I have a fantastic fiance who's, you know, she's definitely on top of it and kind of guiding things along when it comes to the wedding stuff. So I'm #truly blessed.
That's right. Hey, when's the big day?
October 27th. So we had to go out there. Yeah, we had 5 different meetings, I believe, looking back with like the venue and flowers and caterer and DJ and all that. But I mean, we made the most of it. Her mom went out there. We also drove out with her mom's dog, who I was saying during the trip was the best passenger, believe it or not, driving 12 hours in a car. Oh, he's great. He was a little drugged up, I think, but that's okay for being in a car for that long. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. Did rain a lot, but you know, when you're out there and you have to deal with the humidity, like I was complaining about before we got on, it's you'll take what you can get. You know, a little bit of rain won't stop our shine.
Exactly, especially in a place like Estes Park, man. That's one of the greatest places on the earth, that's for sure.
Heaven on earth, and get excited to be married out there coming up here. But I want to make sure you guys follow us on Twitter. Follow me at Nick Kendell MH, and follow Sayre at Sayre Bedinger. That's SayreBedinger. What descent is that, Sayre? What's the nationality?
It's the last name is German.
Okay.
The first name I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly what descent that is. I should probably know that. I'm almost 30 years old. My gosh. So, but I don't know exactly what it is. I know my family's primarily German and English, so I'm guessing it's one of those two.
Hey, same here, dude. Kendell, English, and my mom's both parents are German, so that English-German connection, that's probably where the Iowa Hawkeye stuff comes from.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be. And they just take the red out of the flag, and it's a Hawkeyes flag.
There you go. You can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod, and make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us that rating, as we value your guys' input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles and all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. Also, make sure you head on over to Predominantly Orange, where Sayre does a majority of his work. If you guys enjoy the show, make sure you head on over and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, where the Building the Broncos podcast, along with the Huddle Up podcast, are found under the Huddle Up podcast title. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Alrighty, and we are back today. Carl is off at camp. He's enjoying life. I talked to him a little bit today. He's without service for the most part, but of course that means his phone is blowing up for every chance he kind of pings in. So got to talk to him for a second. Half of that is me talking football with him. What's new? Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're here today, and I actually got this idea from an article that you had over, I believe, at NFL Mocks. where you had the best players that you'd start a franchise with 25 years of age, equal to that or younger. And that is just, that's right in my wheelhouse. I love talking team building, draft philosophy, kind of just franchise pillars, so to speak. And something that, Carl and I will bounce back and forth off. And I feel like I'll ask you guys something like that probably twice, 3 times a year. Kind of like who would be the top 4 guys that you'd take, and et cetera, blah, blah, blah. So it's the dead time of year. And it's a lot of time to talk this kind of stuff. The episode I flew solo yesterday, already looking ahead to the 2020 NFL draft. So definitely for that niche group, but hey, that's what July, June football is for. So talking today, we're going to start it off. We're going to both talk around the league as far as starters that you'd start a franchise with 25 years or younger, as well as the Broncos. But first, we're going to kick it off with the NFL, the league round guys. And I am going to go, I guess I'll go one pick, second pick, if that sounds good to you. Kind of bounce it back and forth.
Yeah, for sure.
And for me, if you're starting a team, obviously it doesn't matter 25 years younger, anything like that. You got to start with a quarterback in that regard. A lot of times I actually kind of like to do these exercises and exclude the quarterback because obviously everyone's going to pick the quarterback. But in this one, we're going to take a quarterback. And I think probably the most talented young quarterback in the league, unfortunately to say, in Patrick Mahomes. This kid, granted, he has a great system around him. He's got arguably the best tight end in football, probably one of the best wide receiver duos, depending on what happens with Tyreek Hill, but definitely explosive, and a brilliant play caller in Andy Reid and a solid offensive line. And man, Patrick Mahomes, the flashes that he had last year were absolutely incredible. 50-plus touchdowns, the left-handed throws, escaping the pocket. He's pretty much Russell Wilson, but if Russell Wilson had a rocket launcher attached to his arm. And that's no slight to Russell Wilson's arm. It's one of the best in the league. But Patrick Mahomes, I would argue that the only player I would say that's up there with him in terms of true velocity and the ability to make just ungodly throws is probably Josh Allen as far as just strength. So I'm going to go with Patrick Mahomes. 1 year starting experience. I know that's definitely something that's kind of a concern, and he threw a decent amount of passes last year that could have been intercepted, but I just think the extra that he can do, the arm talent, the athleticism, he's a little, as I like to say when I'm watching the games, he's a slippery little shit because you think you'll have him and then he'll make that guy hula hoop around him. It's really infuriating when you're going against him, but Patrick Mahomes for me, he's got to be, I think there's another quarterback you could go with, but as far as the tools and everything that he brings to the table, I got to go with Patrick Mahomes as the first guy that I would start a franchise with, 25 years of age or younger.
Yeah, not a bad player to start your franchise with, that's for sure. It's funny, I was doing a little 2017 redraft exercise for the Cleveland Browns today, and just imagine if they had started that draft with Patrick Mahomes. I remember the talk before that draft was all about how the QB class was not necessarily even overrated, but just not good enough. And it turns out that all three of them have been Pro Bowl players in their first couple years. So, and Mahomes obviously the MVP. But I think for my first pick, I am going to go with a QB as well. Like you said, you have to start with a QB. And this was something that I actually, when I was putting together the article that you mentioned, I actually had Baker Mayfield in there because I love him so much. I remember talking about him on the podcast, on the Huddle Up podcast with you, probably over a year ago at this point now, about how much we wanted him on the Denver Broncos.
It was right before the Senior Bowl. I recall that very well. It was a Senior Bowl preview on the offensive side.
Gosh, man. And how cool would that have been? And obviously the Browns had the right way of thinking here. And John Dorsey, these are both John Dorsey's last 2 first picks in his respective drafts. His last draft with KC, he took Mahomes, traded up for him. And his first draft with Cleveland, he takes Baker Mayfield. And so, man, that's a pretty good, he didn't necessarily luck into it either because he had to move up for Mahomes and pick him over Deshaun Watson. Then he had to take Mayfield over Sam Darnold. So he made the right calls in my opinion. And I love Baker Mayfield for a lot of the same reasons that you said with Mahomes. Although he's not 6'3" or 6'4", whatever Mahomes is, Mayfield's got a really strong arm. He's got mobility. And I think the thing that I've always loved the most about him is just his natural football savvy, right? He just understands the game so well. He situationally, he's so aware of everything. He's so competitive. And we've seen that even this offseason. He's calling out his own teammates for requesting trades. And I personally love that. But I think Mayfield, especially this year with the weapons that he's got around him and a pretty good defense to help get him the ball back if he does make some mistakes, I think he's going to be one of the best players in the league now and going forward. Maybe even the first two guys that we mentioned. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me to see Mahomes and Mayfield battling it out for the AFC for the foreseeable future, unless somebody else can. Hopefully the Denver Broncos can step in there and make it. Yeah, come on, Locke. Let's see it, man. But yeah, I'd gladly take Baker Mayfield to start a franchise if I had an NFL team.
Yeah, it's absolutely just baffling that both those guys were at Texas Tech at the same time. And the now head coach of the Arizona Cardinals decided to go with Webb.
Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable. And that's I'm a big David Johnson fan. I do not trust the Arizona Cardinals, so I'm a little bit worried for his career, considering how short the time period is for running backs in the NFL. But what can you do? And I think if we were doing a league redraft right now and you were planning for the future, I would argue that Patrick Mahomes would probably be the first overall pick. Granted, because I took him. The second pick would probably be Baker Mayfield. So that is, unless you're talking guys in college are available too, and then there's maybe an argument for a guy named Trevor Lawrence. But that's a different argument entirely. So, all right, well, moving on now. I have we didn't really go, we have some overlap here. Oh, no, we don't have some overlap. You kind of went.
Yeah, I made sure I picked all different guys.
You zigged when I zagged. All right.
I did.
Well, that's interesting. I'm sorry to take some of the guys that you had in your article then.
It's okay.
We could have some overlap.
No worries.
But for me, the next guy I'm going to go with, I think probably the most explosive young edge rusher in the league. There's nobody that really has his size and speed and power as far as a full combination. He's still kind of coming into his own as far as the tools go. But Myles Garrett, man, he really just started to come into his own last year, and that's despite not having, really arguably one of the worst back sevens in football last year outside of Denzel Ward. Despite the interceptions, they gave up a lot of yards for the Cleveland Browns. But Myles Garrett, man, he is just an absolute terror. Last year against the Steelers, I watched that game, did a film article on Myles Garrett, and he had, I believe, 2 sacks and 2 forced fumbles against Villanueva, who is a really good left tackle for the Steelers. So this is the guy, he's coming into his own, and probably if I was doing a redraft right now for edge rushers in the league, and I'm a huge Bradley Chubb fan, make no mistake about it, but I would take Myles Garrett over Bradley Chubb just because I think Chubb is the more savvy guy. I think he does have a higher floor because he's more refined, and I think there's a little bit more to his game above the shoulders. But as far as the just freakiness in the lower half, the bend, the explosiveness, Myles Garrett takes the cake.
Yeah. I think you described that really well right there. And I think dating back, I remember reading your article about Myles Garrett, and that was awesome. It really opened my eye that he was doing in year 2, which I didn't. Obviously, I don't cover Cleveland that closely, but it was cool to see how he'd progressed from year 1 to year 2. I know he struggled with those injuries in his first year in the league, and that's part of the reason why I don't necessarily have Chubb ranked ahead of him. But in that article that I wrote, I had them both on the same squad because you know what, I could pick 5 guys, and that was my decision to go 2 edge guys. And I see you did as well, and we'll get to that later. But for my second pick, I chose Chubb, and I think that he is the second best edge under 25 right now. And I think that as Broncos fans, it's almost hard to wrap your minds around, right? It's like it's hard for me to even say this because you get a guy like Khalil Mack in his prime right now, and it's hard to see Bradley Chubb being Khalil Mack when we know what Khalil Mack is right now. But when Khalil Mack was coming out of college, he was a very similarly touted prospect to what Chubb was. And we didn't necessarily think that Chubb was going to be going to Denver. So it wasn't like we had this pipe dream of like, oh, we love this guy so much coming out of college and we have this great chance of getting him. No, everyone thought he was going 4th overall at the latest to the Cleveland Browns. And so when the Broncos get him and pair him with Von Miller, that shadow of Von Miller combined with not necessarily the lack of preparation, but just kind of the, he was that unattainable prospect in the draft that nobody really thought we were going to get. And then we ultimately ended up getting him, and we're kind of just catching up to evaluating him as far as just an overall prospect. And I know that I don't necessarily speak for you in that regard because I know you do so much pre-draft work and everything, but Bradley Chubb was every bit as good a prospect coming out in my mind as Khalil Mack was. And I say that in all seriousness, not even as a Broncos fan. I was evaluating him for other teams last year. And so I love what this guy brings to the table. His power, I think his speed is underrated. He's got such a good inside move, and he can stack tackles just with ease. I mean, he makes it look so easy out there. And I think after 12 sacks as a rookie, I don't think very many of those were in cleanup duty. I think he did a good job of getting pressure on, just using his bull rush mainly. I mean, he was just getting there just with straight strength. And so just imagine what he can do as he grows in his abilities and his repertoire as a pass rusher. I think we've only seen the very early stages of what Chubb is capable of being in the NFL.
Yeah, for me, I think the big thing that I've seen with Chubb that I did not take enough into account to is that I kind of had the prototype of Von Miller in my head. And, obviously when you're watching tape, the guys who are twitchier and bendier are easier to appreciate, I guess. And more I'm appreciating the guys who can stack and shed, the size, length, the power edge rushers. Khalil Mack is a guy like that. And Bradley Chubb's another guy like that, where they're so good with their hands and playing in that space and cutting the angles. It's not with the amazing burst or the bend that you see with Von Miller. But, guys like Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Bradley Chubb, they're so good and powerful with their hands, and they can set guys up. And, kind of bringing it back to Iowa here, A.J. Epinesa, another guy like that. So, and we saw, Bradley Chubb went 5 overall, and a more typical kind of 3-4 edge rusher in Harold Landry dropped to the second round in that draft. So definitely something that, you're always evaluating yourself as an evaluator. And that's something I am appreciating more in the game. You don't have to be the most explosive. You don't have to be the most bendy. Obviously, those are good traits to have. If you have them, that's great. But if you're really good with your hands, you can set guys up. You're powerful with your punch. You can string moves together. You can win in this league at a high rate. And that's something that Bradley Chubb has. And he even surpassed my expectations last year. So really excited to see what he can do this year in a system that I think will disguise his coverages disguise his pressures, running him on stunts even a little bit more, and hopefully give him some opportunities to really emerge into one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. So I can't argue with that pick. I honestly went with a different edge rusher here. I'm going to skip to my next edge rusher since we're kind of on the topic here. And I went with a guy. I remember in your original article, you did have Patrick Mahomes, I believe. You did have Myles Garrett, I believe. You also had Bradley Chubb, so you went edge and edge. I wanted to go with a different guy here, a guy that I feel like does not get the national recognition that he deserves, but just an absolute freak that's really coming into his own as a player, and that is Daniel Hunter from the Minnesota Vikings. He's just 24 years old. He'll be 25 soon, but man, he is long, he is bendy, he is bursty, he is strong. A guy that really didn't do much at LSU, was more tools and traits than production. The Vikings took him in the 3rd round, and he has developed into one of the best edge rushers in football. And I would say the contract that he got is an absolute steal. I think he's coming off of 4 years in a row with 10+ sacks. And last year he's had 190 pressures since 2016. And just been absolutely dominant. And you have another edge rusher here that you went with. I went with Hunter, though. I think one of the best things as far as a player is your best ability is your availability. And Daniel Hunter has played pretty much every game. And even last year when Everson Griffin kind of went off the deep end mentally, hopefully he's doing better now. Hunter was the guy that stepped up, and he's still extremely young and emerging, and he really needs more hype. Some people talk Yannick Ngakoue, obviously. You'll talk about another edge rusher, and Bradley Chubb obviously up there, Myles Garrett, but Daniel Hunter is an absolute freak, and he just needs more national recognition. And I mean, not even 25 years old yet, already played. I think he was drafted at age 21 or something. He has a good amount of seasons already under his belt. So just, a phenomenal pass rusher, and I'm a gigantic fan.
Yeah, I remember living in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's Vikings country there, and so I hear a lot about Hunter, and I've heard a lot about him through the years. And it's cool to see finally one of those guys who is all traits based, like you said, coming out of college at LSU, where he wasn't very productive. Kind of one of those guys who has a low floor, really super high ceiling, and we're seeing him hit that ceiling. I think that's a testament to the great coaching that the Vikings have had on the defensive side of the ball, and just their player development in general. I mean, how many unheralded, underdrafted guys have they developed over the years? It's a testament to what they've done there. So really exciting for them. And yeah, you're right. I think that availability is such a key trait for edge players, especially because you've got to, in the NFL anymore, you've almost got to have 2 guys, right? And so I think that the Chargers, Joey Bosa is a guy that I didn't include on my initial list for that specific reason, as availability. But for this exercise and for the sake of having different people, I think that he is one of those guys who's really kind of on the edge for me, because when he's healthy and when he's on, he's really unstoppable out there. I mean, he's a guy who can win in so many different ways. But he really is kind of the second coming of Khalil Mack, just a couple of years or a year after he was drafted. And I think it was 2 years actually. So, but yeah, I mean, we saw what he did after the holdout his rookie season. He came in 10.5 sacks in just 12 games. He just looked like a force out there. He was racking up tackles for loss. He had how many forced fumbles? I mean, he's just all over the place. And so I think if he is healthy, this is a guy that you could definitely build a franchise around. And the Chargers, I mean, look at the defense that they had last year with him only in the lineup for 7 games. This is a defense that didn't hardly skip a beat. And that's a result of a guy that you have on your team here. But I think Bosa is one of those guys who, when he's healthy, that Chargers defense is going to be really something else to try and deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, he's really special. He just needs to stay on the field, and he does have the benefit of having another pretty darn good edge rusher opposite him in Melvin Ingram. So that's definitely a thing. But I wouldn't mind Bosa, but I mean, last year Hunter came onto his own. He did not get enough credit last year. I mean, from the edge position, he had 21 tackles for loss.
Yeah.
And 14.5 sacks and 19 QB hits. I mean, absolute freak. So, I mean, you can't go wrong with any of them. I could hear Yannick Ngakoue as well as being a guy there, but I don't know, man. It's hard to go wrong with any of those guys, and throwing in Bradley Chubb as well. So I'm glad we're on the same page as far as pass rushers being very important. But I'm going to switch it up here. I'm still going to stay on the defensive side. I guess I'm a really heavy defensive head in that regard. But I'm going to go with one of my favorite players in the entire NFL. And honestly, they list him at safety, but he just needs his own position name, because I don't see any other player that does what he does. And that's Derwin James from the Chargers. Last year, he played, the Pro Football Focus counted him as a number of snaps at defensive line, which, I mean, he came off the edge, but still categorized as defensive line, free safety, strong safety / box safety, nickel cornerback, and outside cornerback. His versatility, his athleticism, his size, his physicality, and just his feel for the game. He was coming off that injury his last season at Florida State, and for some reason, and really not a good Florida State team now looking back. I mean, really devoid of talent for being a Florida State team, that is. Right. And, man, a lot of people really it was almost overexposure, that kind of thing, where like, oh, yeah, he's really just overanalyzing him. And he's still Derwin James coming off that injury, and last year we saw it. I mean, the Chargers went from, I believe, the second worst team in the NFL in covering tight ends the year prior to Derwin James to the best team in the NFL in covering tight ends. And I would argue that a huge portion of that, a majority portion of that, is because of Derwin James' ability and length and size and athleticism over the middle. And since we're only taking 5 players, I really wanted to get a jack of all trades. Hell, I'll even say a king of all trades in that back 7. And that's Derwin James. I think that I prefer the value of an edge rusher and a quarterback. If we're starting a team, if I'm doing a draft at all, I'd take those guys earlier because they do elicit more value. But if you put a gun to my head and I had to pick one player from last year's draft that is going to end up in Canton, I'd probably pick Derwin James, because he's just, first team All-Pro as a rookie and doing what he did. I don't know. I don't want to throw out like Sean Taylor comparisons or anything, but he is unbelievable, and it's very unfortunate to see him playing on that Chargers defense, because he's going to be a pain in a long time. And not only that, but listening to his interviews and whatnot, and his coaches talk about him, high school coaches even, he is super intense, driven, intelligent leader type as well. So that's something that matters. And if you can have a guy like that with the skills that he has, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, he really helped establish that Chargers defense as an elite defense. And you're right, all over the field. I think that's part of the reason why I picked the next guy that I picked, Jamal Adams, the safety for the Jets. He's not necessarily the same type of guy, but he's kind of similar in the fact that he does a little bit of everything. 115 tackles last year, 9 tackles for loss, 8 hits on the quarterback, 3 forced fumbles, an interception. He started all 16 games each of his first 2 seasons, even playing that physical brand of football, that a lot of people feel like, isn't necessarily going to fit in the NFL as they continue making rules to protect these offensive players. But Jamal Adams has really found a way around that, and he's been playing elite football for 2 straight years. And I think that he's sort of these two players that we've just mentioned, Derwin James and Jamal Adams, they're really almost setting the example. And obviously Derwin had, Melvin Ingram most of last season, but I think with Joey Bosa only playing 7 games, you could almost argue these guys, they're playing elite football and they're raising the level of their team's defense all across the board without elite edge rushers out there. Especially in the case of these two guys without 2 elite edge rushers. I know, obviously, again, Derwin James had Joey Bosa for 7 games last year. He's going to hopefully, for the Chargers' sake, he's going to have him for all 16 this year. But look at what Jamal Adams has in front of him with the Jets. I mean, they were putting together some seriously patchwork units up in that front 7. Other than Leonard Williams and a couple of other guys up there who are maybe slightly underrated, they don't really have the star power. And now they've got Quinnen Williams there, but man, the edge presence for the Jets is definitely missing. And for them to be able to elevate the defense like they have been, that's just so impressive to me. That's a testament to these guys. The way that I put it when I was talking about Derwin James specifically on the NFL Mocks podcast yesterday, actually, which debuted today, I was talking about the fact that Derwin James and players like him and Jamal Adams really make it feel like your defense is going 12 on 11 because they're so versatile. They're able to take certain people out of the game and just completely limit your options offensively. And I think that that's almost as effective as having another elite edge rusher, really, right? I mean, what are they doing? They're kind of just taking certain things away from the game just by being out on the field. And that's what I think that these safeties are doing. They're changing the game. They're going to start establishing something that teams are going to start looking for players who can do these things. They already are, but now it's going to become kind of a trend. And so it's really cool to see what they've done. And I think that for the first time since really those Sean Taylor days when safeties were so able to dominate games, Ed Reed, guys like that, they were able to dominate games. And then the NFL's kind of gone away from that in a way. You have to kind of play more of the finesse game. These guys are bringing the physicality back. And they're doing it in a way that's in line with the rules and the way that things are progressing. So I think we could see kind of a shift in the way that these guys are evaluated coming out of college and how teams start to develop them. But really, really cool to see them become franchise cornerstones.
Yeah, and I agree. And to further hammer that point, a big thing that I really appreciate about both Derwin James and Jamal Adams is that the NFL, you see a lot of these teams playing. It's all about matchups, right? So you have teams going 11 personnel, and then if they spread you out, they run at you. Or if you go heavy package and you get into your slower, heavy defense, then they'll throw it at you. But if you have a guy like Jamal Adams and Derwin James who can just wear so many hats on the defensive side, it really counters that advantage that offenses have. Because if they want to run it at you, well, you can't do it. They're too big. They're too good of tacklers. If you want to split out a running back and kind of match them up against safety, well, typically that's going to be an issue. I mean, imagine Darian Stewart last year being matched up against Christian McCaffrey. Yikes, that's going to be an issue. But then you have Derwin James or Jamal Adams. Check. You can't do that. The slot receiver, the tight end. I mean, it's really just so you have such a versatile formation back there that you don't have to rush in and out and really – it really mitigates a weakness when you kind of go out there in those different packages. So that's something I think is a big deal with these hybrid guys. And I will admit, coming out, I was more of a Malik Hooker fan than Jamal Adams when that time came, because I thought Malik Hooker, because he took the ball away more, that single high safety, that true canopy safety, I thought that was more valuable. But now looking back, guys who are playing closer to the ball, line of scrimmage, that can do more and affect the short passing game in that regard, and the slot guys, the tight ends, I think that's actually more valuable. And you can get a free safety. Obviously, having a guy like Hooker is great, but you can get guys like that can kind of fill that role. But having a guy that can do all that stuff in the middle of the field, the slot area, I think that is just super valuable with how the game is going. So really both good guys. I think Derwin is just a little bigger, a little faster, a little better than Adams, but both freaks in their own right. And the last guy for me, I'm going to stick on brand here. I've taken 2 pass rushers. I'm going to get that trio. And my favorite young pass rusher, I went back and forth between a couple guys here. One of them was DeForest Buckner, but I ended up going with Chris Jones of the Chiefs. He was definitely my baby coming out of that year's draft. I really wanted to get him and maybe get Dak Prescott later on. Hell, I would even have settled for a Christian Hackenberg if we could have gotten Chris Jones, because really not much of a difference between him and Paxton Lynch, to be completely honest, considering how bad they were. I'd rather take Chris Jones. But yeah, no, absolute freak. Last year, that game against the Chargers, I mean, the Chargers still won, but he was just obliterating Phillip Rivers, and he's super long, super twitchy. There was some questions about his work ethic, how raw he was coming out, but he's put it all together, and I would argue I wouldn't put him above Aaron Donald, obviously, best defensive player in football right now. I wouldn't put him above Fletcher Cox, defensive tackle, but 3, 4, 5, 6 between Chris Jones, DeForest Buckner, Akeem Hicks, or Geno Atkins. I think you could go with any of those guys, but Chris Jones, just getting that interior pass rusher and having your defensive identity be Derwin James in the back seven, play him wherever the hell you want, and then having Myles Garrett, Daniel Hunter, and Chris Jones. I mean, we can play linebacker out there, Sayre. We'd probably be doing okay.
Yeah, exactly, man. You're exactly right about that, and you're right. That's what he brings to the table. He's just a game wrecker from the inside, and if you've got those two other guys who can win with speed and power on the outside, and then James who's kind of roaming back there, I mean, shoot, you really don't need anybody else out. No, I'm just kidding, but yeah, man, I think that's a great pick, and I kind of switched things up from what I initially said because I wanted to talk about him for the next part of this, but I went with Jalen Ramsey for my fifth and final spot here, just because I feel like when I initially made this list, I think I kind of underrated his cover abilities. Yeah. I think he's obviously really, really great in coverage, does so many things well. And I think one of my favorite things about him is just that he talks. If you're a cornerback, that's kind of the MO of great cornerbacks through the years, right? I mean, they're talkers. They're great talkers. I know Champ Bailey bucked that trend. He was just the silent killer out there. But Jalen Ramsey's kind of that traditional throwback, trash-talking cornerback who backs it up with his play on the field. He's been just consistent, very solid, and in fact, elite, I would say, in most regards. And so you look at a guy like that and you pair him with that edge duo that I've got and Jamal Adams on the defensive side. That's a strong building block for your team to start with. And so definitely Jalen Ramsey, one of the best, if not the best cornerback under 25 and under in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I cannot disagree. All right, well, we're going a little bit long. Obviously, you gotta hit the gym here pretty soon. I gotta edit this and run off to the grocery store. So we're gonna take a quick break and pay the bills, but we will be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All righty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. Carl is, quote unquote, out of office today. He's skipping. No, that's okay. So we got Sayre Bedinger today here with us, and I'm Nick Kendell, and we are talking our guys to pick 25 and under to start a team. We started off with the NFL overall here. My team was Patrick Mahomes, Myles Garrett, Derwin James, Daniel Hunter, and Chris Jones. Obviously very defensive heavy with the quarterback. And then Sayre's picks were Baker Mayfield, Bradley Chubb, Jamal Adams, Joey Bosa, and Jalen Ramsey. And we didn't talk about this. I mean, he could have gone with a bunch of the guys that I went also, but didn't in this regard. But I kind of wanted to take it at a different look. We'll drop the quarterbacks here because obviously you're going to take a quarterback, and it's a little bit more philosophical when you can look at it without the quarterback. And we're going to drop the quarterback here. So no Patrick Mahomes, no Mayfield. We're going to add another guy. And for me, honest to God, I know it just worked out this way, but I went 5 defensive players. Screw the offense. Maybe the Broncos 2015 are clouding me a little bit in that regard, but dropping the quarterback, I had a guy that you actually have on here with your original 5 in Jalen Ramsey. I did debate a guy like Denzel Ward. I did debate a guy like Marshawn Lattimore, but Ramsey is just the more physical, versatile guy. I think he's better in both zone and man coverage. And I mean, you talked about him already in that regard. He did have a little bit of down year last year. There are a little bit of off-field questions with him, but I mean, he is a cornerback that kind of comes with the territory of the position sometimes. Not Champ Bailey because he's the GOAT, but Jalen Ramsey, man, if I'm dropping a quarterback here, I'm going to just go all out on that defense, make an elite unit. And if I can get Derwin James, Ramsey with those 3 pass rushers, good night. First 1 to 7 points wins.
Yeah, that's a great point. That would be fun to watch, man. Someday maybe they'll do that style of Pro Bowl selection again, where they pick teams and we'll get to see those guys all on the same team someday. Maybe that'd be pretty cool. But
it'd be more fun.
That would be more fun. I thought that was a cool format. But
yeah,
I went with Saquon Barkley for this. I think just microwave offense. You get him the ball, and we saw it throughout his career at Penn State. I mean, they had him returning the opening kickoff. I can't remember who they were playing against, but I remember seeing one game where he returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. This guy's one of the best just natural running backs that I've ever watched. Just a phenomenal receiver. screw it. Give him the ball as the quarterback. Make him just the wildcat and run the offense through him. We'll go 2008 Miami Dolphins on you and win some games. I think Saquon Barkley, I mean, I know the life of running backs, like you mentioned earlier with David Johnson, very short in the NFL, especially with a high usage. But Saquon Barkley is a guy that I could see just being a transcendental type of star in the NFL for a long while.
Yeah, I have such a philosophical difference against running back. And like, if we're picking a guy to start, you need to win one game. After quarterback, I would argue running back is probably the next position, maybe edge rusher. But as far as the entire career and just how available running backs can be, I mean, good running backs, you kind of churn them in and out. That maybe it's too much Mike Shanahan in my blood there in that regard. The Reuben Drones kind of day. I mean, he had Ron Dane killing it. I think Ron Dane was won the Cobbler Award in that Dallas Broncos game, win the Thanksgiving game.
I remember it. I love it.
Man, the big old Ron Dane. But I can't go with the running back in that regard as far as starting a true franchise, but I can't also argue going with that guy either. I mean, I was at the game, the Iowa Penn State game against Saquon Barkley 2 years ago, and I've never seen a singular dominating performance like that. I don't know how much of a Family Guy watcher you are, but it was like watching Greased Up Deaf Guy. Like they were doing everything they could, and the Hawkeyes did a pretty good job of not letting Barkley break off big runs, but it was just every single time he was able to do it. And they scored a touchdown on the last play of the game to win, unfortunately. But man, he is a freak of freak, and I think if you're taking a running back at all, I think he is the only true option because of what he brings, not only in the run game, but also in the receiving game. So that's something I think that's really important in when I value running backs in today's game. They can't only be a runner. They have to also be a receiver.
Right.
All right, now while switching gears here, we're going to actually go to the Denver Broncos 5 under 25. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to read my guys in order here. And I actually put these in order of how I am valuing them. So number one for me, it's Bradley Chubb. We already talked about him. He is one of the most valuable players in the entire NFL. And honestly, if you had a fire sale on the Denver Broncos right now, everybody was available, everything must go kind of thing, I could make an argument that Bradley Chubb would be the Broncos' highest valued asset. Now, Von Miller is the better player, obviously right now, a Super Bowl MVP, on his way to Canton, it seems. If he keeps it up, he could challenge a sack record, honest to God. But because Bradley Chubb is only 22 years old, the contract that he's under, and just how much more high-level football he has left, I think that you could argue that Bradley Chubb is the Broncos' highest valued asset on the roster right now. So he's got to be number one for me. Then I have a big gap after that because I don't think anybody touches Chubb, positional value and what he brings to the table. Then I go Courtland Sutton. I think that obviously he's not as much of a known product as some other guys on this team, but wide receiver is becoming a position that's being paid more and more. I would argue that the value of wide receiver is approaching the value of offensive tackle in an offense, and I think Sutton is on the verge for a big season, and I like his makeup, and having a boundary receiver that can do what he does, and the movement skills he has, the leaping ability. I don't know. I think he is in for a big year and a very valuable asset. I'm definitely targeting him in fantasy football. Hopefully, none of my counterparts in that are listening to this. Number 3, I actually went with, again, positional value. Drew Lock, you're definitely doing some hoping and some praying in that regard, but quarterback has got to be up there. And still, I mean, he's not super young because he was a senior coming out, a little older for the typical rookie, at least when you think of a quarterback, but still, quarterback, it trumps it. So I'm leaning hard in there into the upside, and it could be a bust. You never know. He could flame out, but I'm going to go with Drew Lock there for 3. Number 4, I went with Justin Simmons. I'm still a believer. He's still relatively young. I think that this scheme, and coming off of a year where he was asked to, quite frankly, cover up some deficiencies of his Darian Stewart back there, I think that hampered him a bit. So now you got Kareem Jackson. You got this better system coming in for him. I'm really excited to see what he can do. And then number 5, I went with the first-round pick this year, Noah Fant. I don't really love to go tight end here, but when you got a guy who is a red zone matchup weapon like he is, that can convert in those small areas of the field like he did at Iowa, which is, something that the Broncos really struggled with last year. The red zone passing offense was atrocious, partially quarterback, partially scheme, partially weapons. So I think Fant's going to help a lot with that, create spacing for those guys as well. So Chubb, Sutton, Locke, Simmons, and Fant for me.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily go in order. I like the order that you put those guys in. I think that's great. I didn't necessarily go in order. I kind of just put them in as the way that they came to me, just as I was thinking about it. Number one, though, I think would be in order Bradley Chubb, like you said, just maybe arguably the most valuable asset the Broncos have in general. I don't even have much else to add about that. I mean, he's a stud. He's a superstar in the making, and he's 1 year in. So the sky's the limit. I think a guy that I have on my list that you don't have on your list, and again, it goes back to the running back positional value. I have Phillip Lindsay. I think that you just hate to see the season-ending injury because it almost validates. I wrote an article about this too, just about whether or not Phillip Lindsay's wrist injury validates what people think about, small running backs coming out of college and whether or not they can't hold up to the physical rigors of the NFL. And I just hope that's not the case with Lindsay. I hope people give him sort of the benefit of the doubt for what was, in my opinion, a freak injury, not a result of a lack of durability. I mean, the guy basically tore a ligament in his wrist going head on into some contact there. Obviously, that's part of his game, though, right? I mean, he did a great job last year of avoiding hard contact, unless you're Kareem Jackson.
Oh, man, he killed him.
Yeah, he just slaughtered him there. But other than that, really, I think Lindsay, and I paid attention to this because I was worried about it most of the year, was that he avoided really hard contact most of the season. And he's a tough guy. So I think what he brings to the table, if you extrapolate his numbers, and obviously that's easy to say, harder to do in real life. But if you extrapolate his numbers to the amount of touches Saquon Barkley had last year, very, very similar in that regard. And so Lindsay, I think, is a stud, an offensive weapon, and I think he's only going to get better as they continue to find out ways to use him in the passing game. I put Cortland Sutton there on my list, number 3. Same reasons as you. I think he can be that alpha type of receiver. Underrated trait for him was that I think it was like a 6.56 or something in the 3-cone. Really underrated short area quickness. And I think if he can find ways to utilize that and not just be that downfield jump ball type of receiver, if we can see him in the short game and get a little bit better after the catch, I think he's going to be a stud in the NFL for a long time. Noah Fant, like you mentioned, red zone weapon, big time speed. He's the type of guy that I think if you get him out in space, like the 49ers have been with George Kittle, I mean, we saw him take his game to a whole other level. And I don't think Fant is necessarily going to be a guy who gets 130 plus targets a year, but if he did, man, he could have a similar type of impact as Kittle's having with the 49ers. He's that talented, that athletic. And then I picked Drew Lock as well. I think you have to have your young quarterback asset on there, even if he's unproven. I mean, not to say they're the same situation because they're not. They were taking 32 picks apart, but you think Kansas City Chiefs fans in 2017 putting together these lists wouldn't have had Mahomes on the list? You're crazy, because he wasn't going to play that year, and he was kind of an unknown commodity. A lot of people had him in the bottom of the first round of their mock drafts, and so you just never know what's going to happen. But I think Locke has a really bright future, very good arm, good head on his shoulders, and I think his age is almost an advantage for him. He's got so much experience against a high level of competition. Really, really intrigued by his upside, and I think the Broncos hopefully have a franchise QB waiting in the wings.
Man, you hope so, but you never know. I guess the main thing for me, I really do think Phillip Lindsay is valuable, but I need to see more in the pass game from him. Mm-hmm. And while I do think he can do it, it just last year, I mean, he has the speed, the jitteriness, but it's kind of a different skill set to not only run those routes and get open in that regard, but to bring the ball in naturally and then convert right away from receiver to a runner. And I just did not see that as much from him last year. It looked a little bit more labored bringing the ball in and kind of that transition. Mm-hmm. So, and I think with the wrist injury, that's something that I'm not sure how much more we're going to see this year, because obviously working the jugs machine and everything, when your wrist is not working, it's kind of hard to catch the ball.
Right.
So still a very good player. And if he played pretty much any position besides running back or maybe nose tackle, obviously fullback as well, I'd have him on here because he is super valuable to the team, especially in the short term. But if I'm talking the career, I'm not sure. I mean, as much as I hate to be that guy, and I know probably some listeners will really roll their eyes at this and maybe even turn it off, but as far as it comes to running backs, I am again, Mike Shanahan, use them and then dump them. Like, use them up, and then once you've had their good years, I'm not looking to pay them. I think that, as much as it kind of was awkward and kind of stemmed some things for the Steelers, I have no issue with what they did with Le'Veon Bell.
Mm-hmm.
You got your best years from him, and then you let him go and let somebody else pay for those other years. It makes me very apprehensive to pay running backs big contracts after those rookie years. So that's something that it's going to be real fun. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of positive feedback when that time comes for Philip Lindsay. So we'll see. All right. Well, we're going to take another break here, and we will be right back on Building the Broncos.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All righty, and we are back on Building the Broncos. Like I said, Carl is out, but we have Sayre here today, which is just as good, maybe even a little better. Nebraska might even be better than Kansas, so definitely better in football. So as much as that pains me to say, so a little less windy there, but if they were one state, who would complain?
Exactly, that's right. Yes, that's exactly right.
Pretty much everything west of Des Moines, that Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska area, the Great Plains, it's just all kind of the tumbleweeds and everything. You got Lincoln and Omaha there. You're out in Omaha, right?
Yes, I'm about 45 minutes from Lincoln, so I'm on the very south end of Omaha right now.
Okay, that's not a bad area.
No, not bad at all. Not bad. It reminds me of my previous home, so I enjoy it.
Well, that's awesome. I'm quote unquote stuck in Iowa City. I absolutely love it. So we'll see what happens. The fiance finishes up her PhD, but I'm going to get you out of here with a little interview. Won't take too long, but I'm going to ask you some Broncos centric questions since we haven't had you on here in a bit, and it's a little one-on-one, a little bit more intimate. So I figured a little bit of intimate interview time. So where was your first kiss? No, I'm just kidding. The upcoming season, just some Broncos-related questions. And I want to ask you who you think the MVP of the Broncos will be this upcoming season.
I think the no-brainer answer is Von Miller. But if I'm going out on a limb, I would say Joe Flacco, because if you're predicting if the Broncos play well, Joe Flacco's got to play well, right? I mean, so if the Broncos are doing well, Joe Flacco could end up being their most valuable player because he's that important to their formula for success this year. So I think the obvious answer is Von Miller, but if the Broncos are going to do well, I think Joe Flacco has to outplay kind of everyone's expectations for him. I know his expectations are high, but I think Flacco has to play not necessarily at a league MVP level, but he has to at least be the Broncos MVP for this team to really take that step back into the postseason. All
right, well that's definitely good answers. I think if it's not Von Miller or Joe Flacco, there might be an issue unless it's the upcoming GOAT, Bradley Chubb. So We'll see. Next question, Rookie of the Year.
I'm going to say Dalton Reisner because I think he's going to start every game. I don't know that Noah Fant is necessarily going to start every game. I don't necessarily even know that he's going to lead all the tight ends in targets, and he very well may. It just depends on kind of how things shake out in training camp like we saw last year. I mean, I think there was a chance that Devontae Booker could have been the starting running back by the end of training camp, and then Royce Freeman ended up winning that starting job, and then Philip Lindsay ended up taking it from him. So you just never know with players like Fant. But I think Reisner is such an impact player for that offensive line, and he'll go underrated maybe by like league standards, but for the Broncos and for the fans and for all of us following the team closely, we'll know exactly the type of impact he's making on a week-to-week basis. And I think it's going to be huge. I think he was NFL ready, obviously coming out, very smart player. They knew they could put him anywhere on the line and he would excel. And I believe that we're going to see that come to fruition. I think he's going to play really well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that one a lot. And I'm really interested to see the dynamic between him and Garrett Bowles. I'm hoping that they force them in training camps to wear one of those, like, this is our get along shirts, just like a 5XL or something, because you need that for that much meat. But those guys need to be attached to the hip, and hopefully that'll be a good relationship for both of them, because the Broncos are really relying on both of them to take steps up this year and fill some voids. Yep. So, all right, well, next question for you on the Broncos. Most underrated player heading into the season?
He's probably not underrated for Broncos fans, but I think for national fans, if there's a lot of those who listen to this podcast, I think Will Parks is a guy that you should know about. Will Parks took, I thought, a huge step forward last year. We kind of saw it early on in preseason and in training camp, just how he was flying around the field. And then he was kind of limited, only 55% of the snaps, despite Darian Stewart's struggles throughout the year. I know they don't exactly play the same position, but I think Parks probably could have done a better job at what Stewart was trying to do than Stewart was doing. So I think Parks is just an underrated guy. He can do so many different things, whether he's playing the nickel, whether he's playing safety, whether he's kind of a dime linebacker out there. He did so many things well. He made that huge play against Pittsburgh that I don't think anyone's going to soon forget to contribute to that victory. So I really like Will Parks, and I think he's going to really establish himself this year as a full-time starter and a player that the Broncos are going to need to find a way to bring back.
Yeah, he's kind of that cash position. If we're going to bring it into that Iowa Hawkeye lingo that Amani Hooker really just took and ran with last year. So I think that's probably his best fit, because he's not super duper athletic or long that you kind of want that back end safety to be the Justin Simmons type, so to speak. But he's also not super gigantic. They're not a linebacker type. But if you can kind of play him that slot safety linebacker hybrid, hashtag cash position, that's really a spot that I think he could thrive in. So I'm interested to see what he'll do this year, especially with Jackson and Simmons in the fold and a bunch of other good safeties the Broncos have. Kind of that's a very interesting position with some depth as far as the training camp and preseason battle goes. And I guess a little spin on this one. Who would you say is the most underrated player as far as it concerns to Broncos country?
Broncos fans, who do we underrate? My gosh. That's a tough question. That's off script. Oh,
I know.
Man.
I'm sorry to throw that at you, but this is my podcast. So
I know. I like it.
Please.
You can do as you please. You can. I think I'll say, and you can sound the horn here. I'm going to go homer pick. I'm going to say Josie Jewell. I think too many people in Broncos country have fed into this narrative that he's so unathletic that he's basically like he's wearing cinder blocks out there on his feet, and he's just not that. We saw him for 4 years at Iowa. Right. I mean, he overcame a lot of athletic limitations. And of course, if you try to put him in space on Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley, he's probably going to fail that matchup. I mean, it just takes one quick out to the sideline and him jolting the other direction in order for him to look like he's wearing cinder blocks on his feet or whatever. But I think Josie Jewell is such a good, smart, fundamentally sound player, very instinctive, understands the game so well. He's going to be like a coach out there on the field. I think he really is one of the most underrated players by Broncos country, especially after all the pining that was going on this offseason for an inside linebacker to come in. Feel like everyone thought we needed Patrick Willis out there or Roquan Smith himself to come into the team in order for this Vic Fangio defense to just magically work. But I think Josie Jewell is a really good player, and I think he's being underrated by the fans as a viable option as a starter in Fangio's defense.
Yeah, I think I would go with his counterpart, because he is often very highly chastised by the fan base. I'm talking Todd Davis. And I think that a lot of he does have player limitations, but he is the signal caller out there. And when you're matched up against Sammy Watkins in the slot as a 240, 245-pound linebacker, I would say that's not on you. I would say that's on the fault. Yeah, that's tip your cap either to the other side or yell at the coaching staff because they got you. Yeah. So Todd Davis, I think he's pretty good, and if you accept that he is more of a box linebacker that come in and he does a really good job filling those gaps and getting off blocks, and he's a little bit better, especially in zone coverage, than people give him credit. I think he is one that people really crap on, but unless you're one of those elite linebackers in coverage, the Deion Jones, Luke Kuechly's, Bobby Wagner's, I mean, there's going to be times where you get got at linebacker, especially with the freaks at slot and tight end and even running backs and receivers today. So I often feel I'm definitely one of the Todd Davis truthers in that regard. You have to accept him for what he is, but he's one that I mean, what do you expect? He's not Luke Kuechly. Right. You can't expect that. So, all right. Next one for you, player that takes the leap this season, the one that takes the next step that really just takes a firm grasp of a role and becomes an integral part of this team going forward.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Deshaun Hamilton for me. I know that we could say it's either going to be him or Courtland Sutton. I think both guys really are going to take a leap in year two, but I think Hamilton, as underutilized as he was last year, I think we're going to see a significant jump for him in year two. A number of people from, I think, Josh Norris maybe, or one of those guys from Roto World was talking about how they think he could be in line for 90 plus catches this year. And that's maybe based nothing on what they know of Rich Scangarello and his offense, but it's based strictly on what they feel he's capable of as a slot type of receiver. And I don't know if Scangarello is going to favor the 12 personnel or the 3 wide receiver sets, but I think that there's a chance that Deshaun Hamilton sees just as many snaps this year as Emmanuel Sanders, kind of similar to what we saw last year with Sutton kind of almost out snapping Demaryius Thomas even before he was traded. And so I think Deshaun Hamilton is a guy to watch out for to take a leap this season.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with that one, and excited to see what he can do with a bigger role this season. All right, overrated player on the Broncos.
I took a little cop out on this one because I couldn't think in the starting lineup. I couldn't necessarily think of a guy that I feel is either overrated by Broncos country or is overrated by national media. I think most Broncos players are honestly underrated by national media, even if they're really good. I mean, look at Von Miller. He's not even being put in the top 5 barely of a lot of people's top 5 edge lists or whatever it is. And so I don't even feed into that. But I think probably the most overrated player, honestly, strictly based on pay and recent performance, is Brandon McManus, the kicker. I mean, he got a big extension and he hasn't followed through. I think he made 2 kicks beyond 50 yards last year, when really it was his ability to do just that helped the Broncos win Super Bowl 50. And so since that time, his accuracy has kind of dwindled down a little bit. I know it was up last year from the 2017 numbers that he put up, but I did a little digging on old Brandon McManus here. Interesting factoid about him. I think it was him and the kicker they brought in, Taylor Bertolet, this offseason. I think they both attempted 7 or 8 field goals from 50 yards out last season. McManus obviously in the NFL, and then Bertolet in 11 AAF games. But it was one of those two, and McManus hit 2 out of the 7 or 8, and Bertolet hit 4. And so just an interesting little, similarity. They had the same exact number of kicks from 50 plus, and Bertolet hit twice as many. So if you're wondering why McManus is the only specialist on the Broncos who has competition this offseason, it could very well be because he's a bit overrated. And I think that he's got to step it up and fix some things this season.
Yeah, and that's definitely a position that you don't want to be paying top dollar for. Like you don't want to be stuck like the Bears where you're going guy after guy, and like the Vikings a few years ago too. But if that's a position that's kind of got a bloated contract, yikes, that's an area you can trim a little bit of fat. So Look out, Brandon McManus. I don't know if you listened to the podcast earlier this month, but we talked about guys that were kind of on the cusp. And I said, McManus, if he doesn't step it up this year, and he might be, because he's decently paid for a kicker. So could be a guy that is needs to watch his back, so to speak. And I love that. So I asked you the final question is the position of the Broncos 2020 first round pick. And you took this as a way that where the Broncos are going to be picking as far as their record placement and everything. I meant what position as far as
the greatest position of need.
Yes. Yeah. So just kind of looking at the draft, just a guess, just for fun. But I like it. You wrote down the early 20s, and that means the Broncos either traded down, maybe traded up, and ended up in the playoff or made the playoffs in that regard. But I was looking for a specific position as far as quarterback, running back, etc.
I am such a sucker for wide receivers, and so I selfishly would love that, especially if Sanders is gone after this year, which it looks like he could very well be. And if the Broncos aren't any good to start the year, he may not even last until the trade deadline. But I would love to see, there's such a good wide receiver class coming in this year. I would love to see one of those receivers. You got me all hyped up on Judy from Alabama, but there's so many other guys out there. I can't even really name them all off the top of my head.
But I would say from Colorado, obviously, CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs. I really like Jalen Reagor from TCU, Tyler Johnson from Minnesota. I mean, it does look like a pretty special class next year at wide receiver.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things too, is you look at what positions are going to be so deep in the coming class, and you take advantage of that depth.
Yeah.
So I could see that, or corner, obviously, with Chris Harris Jr.'s situation, and then you really have Kareem Jackson potentially playing safety, and then next year will be a pseudo contract year for him because the Broncos aren't on the hook for very much dead money after that year next year. So. And the same is true of Bryce Callahan as well. So I think cornerback, depending on how Isaac Yiadom, and even maybe not depending on how Isaac Yiadom develops this year, could be looking at a first round corner in next year's draft, and there's a couple of good players there as well. So those two positions, wide receiver or corner, I think are the early favorites for me.
Yeah, I did like I said, covered a podcast recorded yesterday that'll probably be out on Wednesday morning. This one will probably be out Saturday morning. But I covered a bunch of the way too early 2020 mocks, and the Broncos picked 15 or higher in every single one. But, a lot of questions on the Broncos. I'm not going to sweat that too much. Nobody really knows what they're going to be with all the changes. But I saw a fair amount of wide receivers, whether it be I saw one Jerry Jeudy, a couple of Laviska Shenaults, which would be really fun for the Colorado fans out there. I did see a fair amount also, though, of linebacker with Dylan Moses or Isaiah Simmons with Clemson, and also safety, Grant Delpit. So
that'd be he's a great player, man. Yeah,
he's special. I wouldn't say he's Derwin James. He's more of the free safety type, but I mean, he's a lot of fun. I also saw Derek Brown, interior defensive lineman, which with Harris, Gotsis, and Wolf set to hit free agency, it might be a big need.
Yeah, could very well be.
So we'll see. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Sayre on Twitter at Sayre Bedinger and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Also, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find more content covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Sayre, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Sayre, thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I know you're running off to the gym here. I'm going to edit this and then go do some grocery shopping because we are OUT of pretty much any food. That's what happens when you're gone for a week. And really, thank you for coming on, because I know that the listeners, one podcast with me blabbing by myself is probably enough.
No, man, thanks for having me. It's always good to chat with you. And when Carl's on, it's always good to chat with both of you guys, but I always appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.